The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Chen adjusted her worn combat boots for the third time. The leather had seen better days, passed down from her older brother who had served 2 tours overseas before losing his leg to an improvised explosive device. She had promised him she would carry on the family tradition of service, but, standing here among the towering figures of her male counterparts, she wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. The recruitment office had been a blur of paperwork and stern-faced officers who looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 120 pounds, Sarah hardly cut an imposing figure. Her delicate features and soft-spoken manner had earned her more than a few raised eyebrows when she announced her intention to join the Special Forces training program. The recruiting sergeant had even suggested she might be better suited for administrative duties or perhaps the medical corps. But Sarah had fire in her belly that most people couldn't see. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in Detroit had taught her that survival wasn't about size or strength alone. It was about determination, intelligence, and the ability to adapt when the odds were stacked against you. Her father had been a police officer who died in the line of duty when she was 12, and her mother worked 3 jobs to keep the family afloat. Sarah had learned early that life didn't hand you anything on a silver platter. The other recruits were already forming clusters, sizing each other up like prize-fighters before a bout. Most of them looked like they had stepped out of a fitness magazine, with broad shoulders and confident grins. They spoke in loud voices about their accomplishments in high school football or their experience with hunting rifles. Sarah kept to herself, observing and listening, filing away information that might prove useful later. Drill Sergeant Martinez was a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could wake the dead. He had served in 3 different conflicts and carried himself with the bearing of someone who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and lived to tell about it. His reputation preceded him, and even the cockiest recruits seemed to shrink a little when he stepped onto the training ground. "Listen up, maggots," Martinez bellowed, his voice echoing across the compound. "For the next 12 weeks, I own you. Your mama didn't birth you, I did. Your girlfriend doesn't love you, I do. And if you think this is going to be some kind of summer camp where we sing songs around a campfire, you're about to get a very rude awakening." He began walking down the line of recruits, stopping occasionally to inspect someone more closely. When he reached Sarah, his eyes narrowed slightly. She could feel the weight of his gaze as he took in her small frame and youthful appearance. "What's your name, recruit?" he asked, his voice slightly softer but no less intimidating. "Sarah Chen, sir," she replied, keeping her eyes straight ahead and her voice steady. "And why exactly are you here, Chen? You looking for adventure? Think this might be fun?" "No, sir. I'm here to serve my country and honor my family's tradition of service." Martinez studied her for a long moment, then moved on without comment. But Sarah caught the slight shake of his head, and she knew he had already written her off as another idealistic kid who would wash out before the end of the first week. The initial physical assessments were brutal. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed run that left half the recruits gasping for air. Sarah surprised herself by keeping pace with most of the group, though she could hear the snickering from some of the larger recruits when she struggled with the pull-ups. Her upper body strength had always been her weakness, but she had been working on it for months in preparation. "Hey, Tiny," called out Jake Morrison, a former college linebacker who seemed to take pleasure in making others feel small. "You sure you're in the right place? I think the Girl Scouts meet down the street." A few of the other recruits laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But she said nothing, focusing instead on completing her exercises and proving that she belonged here through her actions rather than her words. The dormitory assignments were another challenge. Sarah found herself bunking with 3 other recruits in a cramped room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and nervous sweat. Her bunkmate was a woman named Jessica Torres, a former police officer from Phoenix who had joined the military after her department was restructured. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, muscular, and intimidating, with a no-nonsense attitude that commanded respect. "Let me give you some advice, kid," Jessica said on their first night, as they prepared for lights out. "This isn't a game. Half these guys are going to try to break you down just because you're small and young. The other half are going to try to protect you because they think you're helpless. Both groups are wrong, but you're going to have to prove it every single day." Sarah nodded, appreciating the frank assessment. She had already figured out that she would have to work twice as hard as everyone else just to be taken seriously. The question was whether she had what it took to keep up that pace for 12 weeks straight. The next morning brought weapons training, and Sarah's heart raced with anticipation. This was what she had been waiting for, the chance to show that size didn't matter when it came to marksmanship. Her brother had taught her to shoot when she was just 10 years old, starting with a .22 caliber rifle and gradually working up to more powerful weapons. She had spent countless hours at the range, developing the steady hands and keen eye that made her a natural marksman. Weapons instructor Collins was a thin, weathered man who looked like he had been born with a rifle in his hands. He moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable with firearms, and his eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the recruits gathering around the weapons rack. "Today we start with the basics," Collins announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had trained thousands of soldiers over the years. "The M4 carbine is the standard infantry weapon, and, by the time you leave here, you'll know it better than you know your own name. But, first, we need to see what you can do with iron sights and basic marksmanship fundamentals." The rifles were distributed, and Sarah felt the familiar weight of the weapon in her hands. She had handled similar firearms before, but never in a formal military setting. The other recruits fumbled with their weapons, some clearly more familiar with firearms than others. Jake Morrison boasted about his deer hunting experience, while another recruit named David Kim admitted he had never held a gun before joining the military. "Shun!" Collins called out suddenly, making everyone turn to look at her. "You look comfortable with that weapon. You have prior experience?" "Some, sir," Sarah replied carefully, not wanting to draw too much attention to herself. "Well, let's see what you can do. Everyone to the firing line." The shooting range was 100 meters long, with paper targets set at various distances. The recruits took their positions, and Sarah found herself between Jake Morrison and David Kim. Jake was still making jokes about her size, while David looked nervously at his rifle like it might explode in his hands. "The fundamentals of marksmanship are simple," Collins explained, walking behind the line of shooters. "Steady position, sight alignment, breathing control, and trigger squeeze. Miss any one of these elements, and you'll miss your target. In combat, missing your target means you or your buddies don't go home." The first round of shooting was at 50 meters, with each recruit firing 5 rounds for familiarization. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar calm that came over her whenever she held a rifle. She controlled her breathing, lined up her sights, and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The first shot felt perfect, and she knew it had hit the target before the spotter confirmed it. The second and third shots followed in quick succession, each one finding its mark near the center of the target. By the time she had fired all 5 rounds, she had achieved a tight grouping that would have made her brother proud. "Not bad, Chen," Collins said, studying her target through binoculars. "Looks like someone actually taught you how to shoot." Jake Morrison's target, by contrast, looked like it had been attacked by a shotgun blast. Several of his shots hadn't even hit the paper, and the ones that did were scattered across the outer rings. His face was red with frustration and embarrassment as Collins pointed out his mistakes. "Morrison, were you actually aiming at the target, or were you just hoping to hit something?" Collins asked with barely concealed sarcasm. "I was aiming, sir," Jake replied through gritted teeth. "Maybe there's something wrong with this rifle." Collins picked up Jake's rifle and quickly fired 3 shots, all of which hit the center of the target. "Rifle seems fine to me. Maybe the problem is between the stock and the trigger." The snickering that had been directed at Sarah earlier was now focused on Jake, who glared at her as if she had somehow sabotaged his performance. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a small surge of satisfaction. She had proven that she could shoot, at least, and that was a start. As the days turned into weeks, the pattern continued. Sarah consistently outperformed most of her fellow recruits in marksmanship, tactical awareness, and academic subjects. Her small size actually proved to be an advantage in some situations, allowing her to move through tight spaces and present a smaller target during training exercises. But the physical requirements remained her biggest challenge. The rope climbing exercise was particularly humiliating. While other recruits powered their way to the top using brute strength, Sarah struggled to make it even halfway up the thick hemp rope. Her arms burned with the effort, and she could feel the eyes of her fellow recruits watching her fail. Jake Morrison made no effort to hide his amusement, offering loud commentary about her lack of upper body strength. "Come on, Tiny," he called out. "My little sister could climb that rope faster than you." Sarah gritted her teeth and tried again, managing to make it a little higher before her grip failed and she slid back down to the ground. The rope burns on her palms stung, but not as much as the blow to her pride. She knew she had to find a way to build her strength faster, or she would be drummed out of the program. That night, she approached Jessica Torres with a proposition. Jessica had been watching Sarah's struggles with a mixture of sympathy and respect, recognizing the determination that kept the smaller woman going even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "I need help," Sarah said simply. "I can outshoot most of these guys, and I can keep up with them on the runs, but I'm going to fail if I can't get stronger." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "You've got heart, I'll give you that. Most people would have quit by now." "Quitting isn't an option," Sarah replied. "This is what I've wanted my whole life, and I'm not going to let my size stop me." "All right," Jessica said. "We'll work out together after lights out. But you have to promise me something. If I help you get stronger, you help me with marksmanship. I can barely hit the broadside of a barn, and Collins is starting to notice." It was a deal that would change both their lives. Every night after the exhausted recruits collapsed into their bunks, Sarah and Jessica would quietly slip out to the equipment room for additional training. Jessica taught Sarah techniques for building functional strength without adding bulk, while Sarah shared the marksmanship secrets her brother had taught her. The improvement was gradual but noticeable. Sarah's rope climbing got better, her push-up count increased, and her confidence grew with each small victory. Meanwhile, Jessica's shooting scores improved dramatically, and she began to earn grudging respect from the weapons instructors. But it was during the wilderness survival exercise that Sarah truly began to shine. The recruits were dropped in pairs into a remote forest area with minimal equipment and told to navigate their way back to base camp within 3 days. Sarah was paired with David Kim, the nervous recruit who had never held a gun before basic training. David was a computer programmer from Silicon Valley who had joined the military partly to prove to himself that he could do something outside his comfort zone. He was intelligent and determined, but completely out of his element in the wilderness. Within the first few hours, it became clear that Sarah would have to take the lead if they were going to make it back on time. Drawing on childhood camping trips with her father and survival skills her brother had taught her, Sarah quickly established their priorities: shelter, water, and navigation. She showed David how to build a lean-to shelter that would keep them dry, how to purify water using their limited supplies, and how to navigate using the sun and stars when their compass proved unreliable. More importantly, she demonstrated a level of tactical thinking that impressed even herself. When they spotted another pair of recruits struggling with a river crossing, Sarah devised a plan to help them while also gaining valuable intelligence about the terrain ahead. Her natural leadership abilities began to emerge as she coordinated their small group's movements and made crucial decisions under pressure. It was David who first noticed that Sarah had a gift for seeing the bigger picture. While other recruits focused on immediate challenges, she was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they arose and developing contingency plans. Her small stature became an advantage as she scouted ahead through dense underbrush, gathering information that helped their group avoid obstacles and find the most efficient route back to base. When they finally emerged from the forest 12 hours ahead of schedule, Drill Sergeant Martinez was waiting with a group of instructors who had been monitoring their progress. Sarah had expected praise for completing the exercise early, but Martinez's expression was unreadable. "Chen," he called out as the bedraggled recruits formed up for debriefing. "Front and center." Sarah's heart sank. She had probably made some mistake that she wasn't aware of, and now she was going to be called out in front of everyone. She marched forward and stood at attention, waiting for the hammer to fall. "The other instructors and I have been reviewing the reports from your survival exercise," Martinez said, his voice giving nothing away. "It seems you took charge of your assigned partner and coordinated with other groups to ensure everyone made it back safely." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, still not sure if this was leading to praise or punishment. "That kind of leadership thinking is exactly what we're looking for in Special Forces candidates," Martinez continued. "But leadership without the physical capability to back it up is useless in combat. You still have work to do, Chen." It was the closest thing to a compliment she had received since arriving at the training facility, and Sarah felt a surge of hope. She was making progress, slowly but steadily, and people were beginning to notice. But she also knew that Martinez was right. All the tactical thinking in the world wouldn't matter if she couldn't keep up with her unit when it counted. The weeks that followed brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. Sarah's shooting scores continued to improve, and she began helping other recruits with marksmanship fundamentals. Her navigation and tactical planning skills earned respect from the instructors, and even some of her fellow recruits began to see her as more than just a small woman trying to play soldier. But Jake Morrison remained a constant source of friction. His own performance had been inconsistent at best, and he seemed to take Sarah's success as a personal affront. His comments became more pointed and cruel, designed to undermine her confidence and remind everyone of her physical limitations. The breaking point came during a combat simulation exercise designed to test decision-making under extreme stress. The scenario involved a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment, with live ammunition being used alongside simulated rounds. The danger was real, even in training, and several recruits had already been removed from the program due to injuries or inability to handle the pressure. Sarah's team was tasked with clearing a building and rescuing a simulated hostage while under fire from opposing forces. She was designated as the team's marksman, responsible for providing covering fire and taking out specific targets as directed by the team leader. It should have been a perfect role for her skills, but Jake Morrison had other ideas. As the team leader, Jake deliberately positioned Sarah in a location where her shooting skills would be less effective, then criticized her performance when the mission began to go wrong. When she attempted to suggest alternative tactics, he dismissed her input and made it clear that he was in charge. The result was a poorly executed mission that ended with the simulated hostage being killed and half the team taking casualty markers. During the debriefing, Jake was quick to blame Sarah's inexperience and lack of physical presence for the team's failure. He painted her as a liability who couldn't be trusted in a real combat situation, and his words carried weight with some of the other recruits who were already skeptical of her abilities. Sarah sat through the criticism in silence, but inside she was seething. She knew the mission could have been successful with different tactics, and she had tried to communicate that to Jake during the exercise. But he had been more interested in proving his dominance than in accomplishing the mission objective. That night, as she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, Sarah wondered if maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was kidding herself about belonging in special forces. Maybe her size and gender would always be insurmountable obstacles, no matter how hard she trained or how much she improved. The doubt crept in like a poison, threatening to undermine everything she had worked for. It was Jessica who found her sitting alone in the equipment room at 3 a.m, still fully dressed and staring at her rifle with tears in her eyes. "You thinking about quitting?" Jessica asked, settling down beside her. Sarah didn't answer immediately, but when she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe they're all right about me being too small, too weak." "You know what I think?" Jessica said. "I think you're the strongest person in this whole program. Not physically, we both know you're working on that. But, up here," she tapped her temple, "you're tougher than any of these guys. You've got something they don't have." "What's that?" "You've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way." Jessica's words stuck with Sarah through the remaining weeks of basic training, giving her the motivation to push through the final challenges and complete the program. But, as graduation approached and assignments were handed out, Sarah faced a new reality. Despite her academic scores and marksmanship abilities, she was being assigned to a support role rather than a frontline combat position. The official reason was her size and physical limitations, but Sarah suspected there were other factors at play. The military was still struggling with how to integrate women into combat roles, and her case had become something of a test case for the program. The conservative approach was to place her where she could contribute without challenging traditional assumptions about women in combat. Sarah had worked too hard and come too far to accept a desk job, even one with good intentions behind it. She knew she had the skills and determination to excel in special forces, but she needed an opportunity to prove it. That opportunity would come sooner than she expected, and from a source she never could have anticipated. The graduation ceremony was held on a crisp autumn morning, with families and friends gathered to watch their loved ones receive their military occupational specialties and unit assignments. Sarah's mother had traveled from Detroit for the occasion, her pride evident despite her concerns about her daughter's chosen career path. Sarah's brother watched from his wheelchair, his own military dress uniform bearing the ribbons and medals he had earned during his years of service. As the names were called and assignments announced, Sarah felt a mixture of disappointment and determination. She would accept her assignment gracefully, but she wouldn't give up on her dream of serving in a combat role. Somehow, someway, she would find a way to prove that size and gender were less important than skill and dedication. She had no way of knowing that someone in the audience had been watching her performance throughout the training program with great interest. Someone who understood that unconventional soldiers sometimes made the best warriors. Someone who would soon give her the chance she had been waiting for, though it would come with challenges she could never have imagined. 3 months into her assignment at Fort Braxton's Intelligence Analysis Division, Sarah Chen found herself buried under stacks of satellite images and reconnaissance reports that painted a grim picture of escalating conflicts around the world. Her days were spent in a windowless basement office, analyzing enemy movement patterns and writing detailed assessments that would be read by officers who had never seen combat. It was important work, she told herself, but it wasn't what she had envisioned when she signed up to serve her country. Her supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Walsh, was a career intelligence officer who had spent 20 years climbing the military hierarchy without ever setting foot in a combat zone. Walsh viewed Sarah as a promising analyst who needed to accept her limitations and focus on playing to her strengths. The older woman meant well, but her patronizing attitude grated on Sarah's nerves. "Chen, I've got another assessment request for you," Walsh said, dropping a thick folder on Sarah's already cluttered desk. "Satellite imagery from the Kazakh region. Command wants a full tactical analysis of enemy positions and movement patterns. This is exactly the kind of work you excel at." Sarah looked up from the computer screen where she had been tracking supply convoy routes for the past 6 hours. Her eyes were tired, and her back ached from hunching over reports all day. "Yes, ma'am. When do they need it?" "End of the week." "And, Chen?" Walsh paused at the door. "I know this isn't the assignment you wanted, but you're making a real difference here. The intelligence you provide saves lives in the field." After Walsh left, Sarah stared at the folder for a long moment before opening it. The satellite images showed rugged mountain terrain dotted with what appeared to be enemy encampments and supply caches. It was the kind of complex tactical puzzle that she actually enjoyed solving, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching the war from the sidelines instead of participating in it. Her lunch break had become a ritual of visiting the base's shooting range, where she could maintain her marksmanship skills and burn off some of her frustration. The range master, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, had taken an interest in her shooting and often stayed after hours to help her work on advanced techniques. "You know," Rodriguez said one afternoon as they cleaned their weapons after a particularly intensive session, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've rarely seen natural talent like yours. Your groupings at 800 meters are better than most of our designated marksmen." "Thanks, Sergeant. It helps clear my head." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "You mind if I ask why someone with your skills is stuck in analysis instead of out there putting them to use?" Sarah shrugged, not wanting to voice her own frustrations. "That's where they needed me, I guess." "Maybe," Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "Or maybe the right person just hasn't noticed what you can do yet." What Sarah didn't know was that Rodriguez had already sent an informal report up the chain of command, recommending that she be considered for advanced marksmanship training. The report had made its way to Colonel James Harrison, the base's Special Operations Liaison, who had been quietly keeping track of unconventional candidates for specialized missions. Harrison was a different breed of officer than most Sarah had encountered. He had come up through the ranks as an enlisted soldier, earning his commission through battlefield performance rather than military academy training. His reputation was built on results rather than politics, and he had a talent for identifying potential in unexpected places. The colonel's interest in Sarah intensified when he received a classified request from Washington for personnel recommendations for a highly sensitive mission. The details were sparse, but the requirements were specific: exceptional marksmanship skills, small physical profile suitable for covert insertion, and psychological resilience under extreme stress. Sarah's file checked all the boxes, but Harrison needed to see her in action before making his recommendation. He began appearing at the shooting range during Sarah's practice sessions, observing from a distance while she worked through increasingly difficult scenarios. What he saw impressed him. Sarah approached each challenge methodically, adapting her technique to different weapons and environmental conditions with the instinctive understanding of a true marksman. More importantly, she remained calm and focused under pressure, never allowing frustration or fatigue to affect her performance. The opportunity Harrison had been waiting for came during a base-wide training exercise designed to test readiness and identify emerging talent. All personnel, regardless of their assigned duties, were required to participate in combat simulations that would push them beyond their comfort zones. For Sarah, it represented a rare chance to demonstrate her capabilities outside the confines of her office job. The exercise scenario involved a simulated terrorist attack on a civilian compound, with various military units tasked with neutralizing the threat and rescuing hostages. Sarah was assigned to a support role, providing intelligence analysis from a command post several miles from the action. It was exactly the kind of assignment that reinforced her non-combatant status, and she accepted it with her usual professional demeanor. But plans have a way of changing when live ammunition starts flying, even in training exercises. The scenario began to go wrong almost immediately when one of the primary assault teams encountered unexpected resistance and took heavy casualties. The exercise controllers had introduced variables that weren't in the original plan, simulating the kind of chaos and unpredictability that define real combat situations. Within 30 minutes, the carefully planned operation had devolved into a desperate scramble to salvage the mission. Colonel Harrison was observing from the command post when reports began flooding in about the deteriorating situation. The assault team was pinned down by simulated sniper fire from a position that hadn't been identified in the pre-mission intelligence. The exercise hostages were in immediate danger, and conventional tactics weren't working against the enemy's elevated position. "We need eyes on that sniper position," Harrison announced to the command post staff. "Get me a reconnaissance team up that ridge line." "Sir," replied the operations officer, "our recon teams are already committed to other objectives. It would take at least an hour to redeploy assets to that location." Harrison studied the tactical display, his mind racing through options that were all unsatisfactory. The exercise would be terminated soon if they couldn't neutralize the sniper threat, which would mean mission failure for everyone involved. More importantly, real soldiers in a similar situation would be dying while commanders debated resource allocation. That's when Sarah spoke up from her position at the intelligence console. "Sir, I could provide reconnaissance on that position. I'm familiar with the terrain from the satellite imagery, and I could be in position within 20 minutes. The command post fell silent as everyone turned to look at the small analyst who had just volunteered for a dangerous field mission. Harrison studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks and benefits of her proposal. "Chen, you're an intelligence analyst, not a field operative. This isn't your job. With respect, sir, right now the job is saving those hostages. I can get close enough to identify the sniper's exact position and capabilities. Someone needs to do it, and I'm available." Harrison could see the determination in her eyes, the same quality he had observed during her shooting practice. Against his better judgment and the protests of other staff officers, he made a decision that would change Sarah's military career forever. "All right, Chen. Take a radio and a spotting scope. Get me eyes on that position and report back. But you are strictly reconnaissance, observe and report, nothing else. Clear?" "Clear, sir." As Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to leave the command post, Lieutenant Colonel Walsh tried to intervene. "Sir, I must protest this decision. Analyst Chen is not trained for field operations. This is extremely irregular." "Irregular situations require irregular solutions," Harrison replied. "Chen volunteered, and she's the best option we have right now." Sarah's journey to the ridgeline was a textbook example of tactical movement. She used the terrain to mask her approach, moving in short rushes between cover and constantly scanning for threats. Her small size allowed her to navigate through areas that would have been impossible for larger soldiers, and her intelligence training helped her identify the best observation positions. When she finally reached a suitable vantage point overlooking the enemy sniper's position, Sarah was amazed by how much the satellite imagery had missed. The enemy had constructed an elaborate hide site that was virtually invisible from aerial reconnaissance, using natural camouflage and clever positioning to mask their presence. It was the kind of tactical sophistication that could only be detected by someone on the ground with a trained eye. "Command, this is Chen," she whispered into her radio. "I have eyes on the target. The enemy position is not a simple sniper hide. They've constructed a complex fortification with multiple firing positions and escape routes. Current tactics won't be effective against this setup." Harrison's voice crackled back through her earpiece. "Understood, Chen. What do you recommend?" Sarah studied the position through her spotting scope, her analytical mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and vulnerabilities. What she saw made her realize that conventional assault tactics would likely fail, resulting in heavy casualties among the exercise participants. Sir, the primary position has overlapping fields of fire that make a direct assault extremely costly. But, there's a dead zone on the eastern approach that would allow a single shooter to get within effective range. Someone with precision marksmanship capability could neutralize the threat from there. How close would they have to get? Sarah did the math in her head, factoring in wind conditions and the mountainous terrain. Approximately 400 meters for a clean shot. Maybe less if they could get higher elevation. There was a long pause before Harrison responded. Chen, can you get to that position? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew that Harrison was asking more than whether she could physically reach the location. He was asking whether she had the courage and skill to take on a mission that was far outside her assigned duties and training. Yes, sir. I can get there. Negative, Chen. Your orders are to observe and report. We'll get a qualified marksman to that position. But, even as Harrison spoke, Sarah could hear the communications chatter indicating that no qualified marksmen were available in the immediate area. The assault team was still pinned down, and the exercise clock was running out. In a real situation, soldiers would be dying while commanders tried to find the perfect solution to an imperfect problem. Sarah made a decision that would haunt and define her for years to come. Instead of acknowledging Harrison's order, she began moving toward the position she had identified. Her movement was careful and deliberate, using every piece of cover available while maintaining visual contact with the enemy position. Chen, report your status. Harrison's voice came through her earpiece with increasing urgency. Moving to secondary observation position for better angle, Sarah replied, which was technically true even though it wasn't the complete truth. The approach took her nearly an hour of careful stalking through rocky terrain that seemed designed to challenge even experienced mountain fighters. Her intelligence training had included basic fieldcraft, but this was her first real test of those skills under pressure. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow could hide an enemy observer, and every decision carried the weight of mission success or failure. When she finally reached the position she had identified, Sarah was amazed to find that her calculations had been almost perfect. She had a clear line of sight to the enemy position at a range of approximately 350 meters. The angle was challenging but manageable, and the natural rock formation provided excellent concealment for her own position. She set up her rifle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent countless hours on the shooting range. The weapon was a standard M4 carbine rather than a precision rifle, but Sarah had learned to work with whatever tools were available. She adjusted for wind and elevation, steadied her breathing, and lined up her shot. Through her scope, she could see the exercise opposing force members who were playing the role of enemy snipers. They were using blank ammunition and laser simulation systems, but their tactical skills and fieldcraft were genuine. Taking them out would require precision and timing that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Command, this is Chen. I have a shot. The radio exploded with chatter as Harrison and other officers tried to understand what Sarah was reporting. It took several moments for the situation to become clear. The intelligence analyst had somehow maneuvered into a firing position and was requesting permission to engage. Chen, what is your location? You were ordered to observe only. Sir, I'm in position to neutralize the threat. The assault team is still pinned down, and time is running out. Request permission to engage. Harrison found himself facing a command decision that could make or break careers, including his own. Sarah had clearly exceeded her orders and put herself in potential danger. But she had also positioned herself to accomplish the mission when other options had failed. In a real combat situation, such initiative might be the difference between success and catastrophe. Before Harrison could respond, the exercise took another turn for the worse. The simulated enemy forces launched a counterattack that caught the assault team completely off guard. Without immediate support, the exercise would end in total mission failure with significant simulated casualties. Chen, Harrison's voice was tight with the stress of command. You are cleared to engage. Take the shot. Sarah's first shot took out the primary sniper position with a precision that surprised even her. The laser simulation system registered a direct hit, and the targeted opposing force member was immediately ruled out of action. Her second shot, fired within seconds of the first, eliminated the backup position before the enemy could react to the initial attack. With the sniper threat neutralized, the assault team was able to advance and complete their mission. The hostages were rescued, the remaining enemy forces were captured or eliminated, and the exercise concluded successfully. But the real story wasn't the mission's success, it was the performance of an intelligence analyst who had exceeded every expectation and demonstrated capabilities that no one had fully recognized. The after-action review was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She found herself sitting in a conference room filled with senior officers who were trying to understand how an analyst had ended up as the key player in a special operations scenario. Some of the questioning was clearly skeptical, probing for mistakes or protocol violations that could be used to minimize her contribution. But Colonel Harrison's assessment was unequivocal. Analyst Chen demonstrated exceptional tactical thinking, marksmanship skills, and leadership under pressure. Her actions directly contributed to mission success and prevented significant simulated casualties among our assault personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Walsh was less supportive, arguing that Sarah had violated her orders and put herself in unnecessary danger. While I acknowledge that the outcome was positive, we cannot encourage analysts to exceed their assigned roles and take unauthorized risks. This sets a dangerous precedent. The debate continued for hours, with various officers arguing about proper procedures, chain of command, and the appropriate role of support personnel in combat scenarios. Sarah sat through most of it in silence, knowing that her future in the military might depend on how these senior officers chose to interpret her actions. It was Harrison who finally cut through the bureaucratic discussion with a simple question: if this had been a real mission with real lives at stake, would we be having this conversation? The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of his words. In combat, results mattered more than procedures, and Sarah had delivered results when conventional approaches had failed. After the other officers left, Harrison asked Sarah to remain behind for a private conversation. She expected another lecture about following orders and staying within her assigned role, but Harrison surprised her with a completely different message. "Chen, what you did today was either brilliant or reckless, and I'm not entirely sure which. But I've been watching your performance for weeks, and I think you have capabilities that are being wasted in intelligence analysis." Sarah waited, not sure what Harrison was leading up to. "I'm going to recommend you for advanced training. Specialized skills that would put your marksmanship and tactical thinking to better use. But I need to know, are you prepared for assignments that would be significantly more dangerous than what you're doing now?" The question wasn't difficult to answer. Sarah had been preparing for this moment since she first decided to join the military. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." "Good. But understand that specialized training means specialized expectations. There won't be any allowances made for your size or gender. You'll be held to the same standards as everyone else, and if you can't meet those standards, you'll be returned to your current assignment with no hard feelings." "I understand, sir." Harrison nodded and made a note in Sarah's file. "I'll send my recommendation up the chain tomorrow. Don't expect quick results, these decisions take time, and there are a lot of factors beyond performance that influence assignments. But you've earned the opportunity to try." As Sarah left the conference room, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had proven that she could perform under pressure, but she had also learned that success in the military often created as many challenges as it solved. The attention her performance had attracted wasn't all positive, and she knew there would be consequences to face regardless of how well-intentioned her actions had been. Over the following weeks, Sarah noticed changes in how she was treated by both her colleagues and her supervisors. Some people looked at her with new respect, recognizing that there was more to the quiet analyst than they had previously realized. But others seemed resentful or skeptical, viewing her success as some kind of fluke or special treatment. Lieutenant Colonel Walsh became particularly distant, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Sarah's performance had brought to their division. Walsh had built her career on careful adherence to procedures and regulations, and Sarah's initiative-taking represented everything she found unpredictable and potentially dangerous about military operations. "Chen," Walsh said during one of their weekly briefings, "I want you to understand that what happened during the exercise was an exceptional circumstance. I don't want you getting any ideas about this becoming a regular part of your duties." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, though privately she wondered what Walsh was really afraid of. The answer came a few days later when Sarah overheard a conversation between Walsh and another officer discussing her future. Walsh was clearly worried that Sarah's success would reflect poorly on her own leadership, suggesting that she had failed to properly evaluate and utilize her personnel. The older woman was actively working to ensure that Sarah remained in her current assignment, arguing that stability and consistency were more important than pursuing unproven opportunities. Sarah realized that she was caught in a political struggle that had little to do with her capabilities and everything to do with career protection and bureaucratic inertia. Her performance had created ripple effects throughout the command structure, forcing people to question assumptions and make decisions they would prefer to avoid. But Colonel Harrison had allies of his own, and Sarah's file was making its way through channels that Walsh couldn't influence. 3 weeks after the exercise, Sarah received orders that would change the direction of her military career forever. She was being transferred to a classified training program that would prepare her for specialized operations requiring unique skill sets. The orders were vague about specifics, mentioning only that she would be working with elite military units on missions of national importance. But Sarah understood the subtext. She was being given the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to prove that her capabilities were limited only by the mission she was given rather than by other people's expectations. Her last day in the Intelligence Analysis Division was bittersweet. She had learned valuable skills during her time there, and she genuinely respected most of her colleagues. Even Lieutenant Colonel Walsh, despite their philosophical differences, had taught her important lessons about military organization and the importance of thorough preparation. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into, Chen," Walsh said during their final meeting. "Specialized operations sound exciting, but they come with risks and responsibilities that most people can't handle." "I understand, ma'am. Thank you for everything you've taught me." Walsh studied her for a long moment, then extended her hand. "Good luck, soldier. I hope you prove me wrong about this being a mistake." As Sarah packed her few personal belongings and prepared to leave Fort Braxton, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. She was the same person who had struggled through basic training and endured the doubts of instructors who couldn't see past her physical appearance. But she was also someone who had proven that determination and skill could overcome conventional limitations when the situation demanded it. The transfer orders directed her to report to a facility that didn't appear on any public maps, where she would begin training for missions that were classified at levels she had never encountered before. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about, but it also represented a point of no return in her military career. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the safety and predictability of intelligence analysis. She was about to enter a world where success and failure were measured in life and death terms, where her skills would be tested against enemies who would show no mercy for mistakes or hesitation. As her transport pulled away from Fort Braxton, Sarah watched the familiar buildings disappear behind her and wondered what kind of challenges awaited her at her new assignment. She had no way of knowing that her journey was about to take her into the most elite and secretive corners of military operations, where soldiers were expected to accomplish the impossible with minimal support and maximum precision. The future was uncertain, but, for the first time since joining the military, Sarah felt like she was moving toward her true calling rather than away from it. The facility that Sarah arrived at bore no resemblance to any military installation she had ever seen. Hidden deep in the mountains of Colorado, it appeared to be nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings that might have once housed a mining operation. No signs, no flags, no indication that this remote location was home to one of the military's most classified training programs. Sarah's transport dropped her at a gate that looked like it belonged to a private ranch, complete with a rusty cattle guard and a mailbox that simply read Mountain Research Station. The only hint that this wasn't an ordinary civilian facility was the subtle presence of security cameras and the fact that her driver had required special clearance codes to even find the location. A man in civilian clothes met her at the gate, checking her identification against a list on his clipboard before waving her through. He looked like a college professor or perhaps a government scientist, the kind of person who might study weather patterns or geological formations. But Sarah noticed the way he moved, the constant awareness of his surroundings, and the bulge under his left arm that suggested military training despite his academic appearance. "Welcome to the ranch, Chen," he said as he led her toward the main building. "I'm Dr. Michaels, and I'll be your orientation officer. You'll find that things work a little differently here than at conventional military installations." The interior of the main building revealed the true nature of the facility. Behind the rustic facade was a high-tech complex that rivaled anything Sarah had seen in government facilities. Computer workstations, communications equipment, and sophisticated training simulators filled rooms that had been carefully designed to appear unremarkable from the outside. "What exactly is this place?" Sarah asked as they walked through corridors lined with unmarked doors. "Officially, we don't exist," Dr. Michaels replied with a slight smile. Unofficially, we develop and train personnel for operations that require unique combinations of skills and psychological profiles. Think of it as a finishing school for soldiers who don't fit into conventional categories. They stopped at a door marked only with the number 7, and Dr. Michaels gestured for Sarah to enter. The room beyond contained a single desk, a computer terminal, and walls lined with filing cabinets that appeared to be secured with electronic locks. Your first week will be spent in evaluation, Dr. Michaels explained. We need to understand your capabilities, your limitations, and your psychological profile before we can determine which training track will be most suitable. The process is comprehensive and, sometimes uncomfortable, but it's necessary for what comes next. He handed her a thick binder filled with forms and assessments. These need to be completed by tomorrow morning. Take your time and be completely honest. Any attempts to present yourself in what you think is a favorable light will be detected and will result in your immediate return to your previous assignment. Sarah spent the next several hours working through psychological evaluations, aptitude tests, and detailed questionnaires about her background and motivations. The questions were unlike anything she had encountered before, probing deeply into her thought processes, fear responses, and moral reasoning. Some scenarios seemed designed specifically to identify weaknesses or potential breaking points under extreme stress. One section focused on her willingness to operate independently without oversight or support. Another explored her ability to compartmentalize information and maintain operational security under interrogation. A third section presented moral dilemmas that had no clear right answers, forcing her to explain her decision-making process in situations where all choices carried significant consequences. The most unsettling part of the evaluation was a series of questions about her personal relationships and emotional attachments. The assessment seemed designed to determine whether she had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemies or psychological connections that might interfere with mission completion. It was a reminder that the work she was being considered for would require sacrifices that went far beyond physical risk. Her living quarters were spartanly furnished but comfortable, located in a dormitory building that housed perhaps a dozen other trainees. Sarah rarely saw her fellow candidates except at mealtimes, and even then, conversation was limited to basic pleasantries. Everyone seemed focused on their own evaluation process, aware that they were competing for limited slots in whatever program this facility supported. The other trainees were an eclectic mix that defied easy categorization. There was a former police detective who had served in Iraq, a computer specialist who looked like he had never left a laboratory, and a woman who might have been a professional athlete or perhaps a former special forces operator. What they all shared was an intensity and focus that suggested they had already proven themselves in demanding circumstances. Dr. Michaels conducted follow-up interviews throughout the week, discussing Sarah's assessment responses and probing deeper into specific areas of concern. His questions were always precise and carefully worded, designed to elicit information about her thought processes rather than simple factual responses. Your marksmanship scores and tactical thinking assessments are exceptional, he said during one session. But I'm curious about your motivation. Most candidates for this program are driven by specific experiences, combat losses, failures in previous assignments, personal vendettas. Your file suggests a different pattern. Sarah considered how to respond honestly without revealing more than was appropriate. I've always felt like I had more to offer than my assignments allowed me to demonstrate. The military gave me opportunities to develop skills, but not to apply them in meaningful ways. And what would constitute meaningful application? Missions where success depends on individual capability rather than institutional support. Situations where conventional approaches won't work and creative solutions are required. Dr. Michaels made notes in a file that he kept carefully shielded from Sarah's view. That's an interesting perspective. Most soldiers prefer clear chains of command and established procedures. You seem to thrive in uncertainty. I suppose that's true. I've always been better at adapting to circumstances than following predetermined plans. The conversation continued for another hour, touching on subjects ranging from her childhood experiences to her long-term career goals. Dr. Michaels had a talent for asking questions that revealed more than Sarah intended to share, but she sensed that her honesty was being evaluated as carefully as her responses. On Friday afternoon, Sarah was summoned to a different building where she found herself face to face with 3 officers whose rank and unit affiliations were not immediately apparent. They wore military uniforms without unit patches or name tags, and their demeanor suggested senior leadership positions despite their relatively young ages. Miss Chen, said the officer seated in the center, a woman with prematurely gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. We've reviewed your evaluations and background, and we have some questions about your suitability for advanced training. The interview that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The questions came rapidly from all three officers, covering technical subjects, tactical scenarios, and hypothetical missions that seemed designed to test her ability to think under pressure. They challenged her assumptions, criticized her responses, and pushed her to defend positions that became increasingly difficult to justify. You're physically smaller than ideal for most special operations roles, observed the male officer on the left. How do you compensate for limitations in strength and endurance? I focus on precision and efficiency rather than brute force approaches, Sarah replied. Speed and accuracy can often accomplish more than raw strength, especially in precision missions. That's a nice theory, the third officer interjected. But what happens when precision isn't enough? When you need to carry a wounded teammate or breach a reinforced door? Then, I need to be smart enough to avoid those situations or creative enough to find alternative solutions. Every operator has limitations, the key is understanding them and working within them while maximizing strengths. The questioning continued for over 2 hours, covering scenarios that ranged from urban warfare to wilderness survival to prisoner interrogation. Sarah found herself drawing on everything she had learned during her military training, but also reaching back to childhood experiences and instincts that she hadn't examined in years. When the interview finally concluded, Sarah was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She had been pushed harder than ever before, forced to articulate thoughts and positions she had never fully explored. Whether her responses had been satisfactory remained unclear, but she felt confident that she had presented herself honestly and completely. Thank you for your time, Miss Chen, said the senior officer. You'll receive notification of our decision within 72 hours. Regardless of the outcome, your performance during this evaluation has been noted in your file. Sarah spent the weekend in a state of nervous anticipation, reviewing every aspect of her week at the facility and wondering whether she had met whatever standards these mysterious officers apply to their selections. She had come too far to accept failure easily, but she also understood that some opportunities came only once in a military career. Monday morning brought a summons to Dr. Michael's office, where she found him sitting with a new folder that bore her name and a classification marking she didn't recognize. Congratulations, Chen. You've been accepted for Phase 1 training in the Specialized Applications Program. This is a significant opportunity, but it also comes with responsibilities and risks that you need to understand before we proceed. He opened the folder and showed her documents that outlined a training regimen unlike anything described in standard military manuals. The program would last 6 months and would cover skills ranging from advanced marksmanship to survival psychology to operational planning for missions that required individual initiative rather than unit coordination. What exactly will I be training for? Sarah asked. Missions that conventional forces can't handle, situations where small teams or individual operators are required to accomplish objectives that would normally require much larger military units. Think of it as special operations for scenarios that are too sensitive or too dangerous for traditional special forces. Dr. Michaels explained that the program had been developed to address gaps in military capability that had become apparent during recent conflicts. There were situations where conventional forces were either too large to deploy covertly or too inflexible to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The Specialized Applications Program trained personnel who could operate independently in these challenging environments. The training is physically and psychologically demanding, he continued. We lose approximately 60% of candidates during Phase 1, and those who complete the program are assigned to missions that carry significant risks. You need to be absolutely certain that this is the path you want to pursue. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm ready to begin. Her first day of actual training began at 4:30 in the morning with a run through mountain terrain that would have challenged experienced marathon runners. The instructor was a weathered man in his 40s who introduced himself simply as Logan and made it clear that he had little patience for excuses or complaints. You're not here to become soldiers, Logan announced to the group of 8 candidates who had assembled for the start of Phase 1. You're here to become weapons. Weapons don't complain about discomfort, weapons don't question orders, and weapons don't fail when they're needed most. The physical training was more intense than anything Sarah had experienced during basic training or her time at Fort Braxton. Every exercise was designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limitations, forcing them to discover reserves of strength and endurance they didn't know they possessed. Sarah's small size initially seemed like a disadvantage, but she gradually learned to use it strategically, finding ways to complete challenges that relied more on technique and determination than raw power. Marksmanship training took place on ranges that simulated real-world conditions rather than controlled environments. Sarah found herself shooting in rain, snow, high winds, and low-light conditions that made precision extremely difficult. The targets were often moving, partially concealed, or positioned at extreme distances that challenged even her exceptional skills. "Forget everything you learned about recreational shooting," instructed Master Sergeant Collins, the range instructor. "In operational environments, you'll never have ideal conditions. Your targets won't stand still, your position won't be stable, and you won't have unlimited time to line up your shots. Learn to make impossible shots under impossible conditions, or find another line of work." The psychological training was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the program. Sarah found herself subjected to stress simulations that tested her ability to maintain focus and make critical decisions while under extreme pressure. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and psychological pressure techniques pushed her to the edge of her mental resilience. One exercise required her to solve complex puzzles while being subjected to loud noises, flashing lights, and verbal harassment from instructors who were trained to identify and exploit psychological weaknesses. Another involved navigating obstacle courses while carrying out detailed mathematical calculations that required precision and concentration. "Mental toughness isn't about ignoring stress," explained Dr. Sarah Winters, the program's chief psychologist. "It's about maintaining cognitive function despite stress. Soldiers who break under pressure don't just fail missions, they get people killed." 3 weeks into the program, Sarah experienced her first major setback. During a survival exercise in the mountains, she became severely dehydrated and collapsed while attempting to complete a 30-mile navigation course in sub-freezing weather. Her teammates carried her to safety, but the failure represented exactly the kind of physical limitation that could eliminate her from the program. Logan was blunt in his assessment during the debriefing. "You pushed too hard and didn't manage your resources properly. In a real operational environment, that mistake could compromise an entire mission. What are you going to do differently next time?" Sarah spent hours analyzing her performance, identifying the specific decisions that had led to her collapse. She had been so focused on keeping up with larger, stronger teammates that she had ignored her body's warning signs and failed to adapt her strategy to her physical capabilities. "I was trying to match their pace instead of finding my own optimal performance level," she admitted during her follow-up meeting with Dr. Winters. "I need to be smarter about understanding my limits and working within them." "That's a mature assessment," Dr. Winters replied. "But understanding the problem and solving it are two different things. How do you plan to avoid similar failures in the future?" Sarah had been thinking about that question since her collapse. "I need to develop better situational awareness about my own condition, not just external threats. And I need to be more strategic about when to push hard and when to conserve energy for critical moments." Her opportunity for redemption came during a complex urban warfare exercise that required teams to clear a multi-story building while protecting simulated civilians and neutralizing multiple threats. Sarah's team was assigned the most challenging section of the building, where conventional tactics would likely result in significant casualties. Drawing on lessons learned from her earlier failure, Sarah approached the mission with a completely different mindset. Instead of trying to match the aggressive tactics of her larger teammates, she focused on precision and intelligence gathering. While others prepared for direct confrontation, she identified vantage points that would allow her to provide covering fire and eliminate specific threats without endangering civilians. Her performance during the exercise was flawless. Using advanced marksmanship skills and tactical positioning, she neutralized 6 simulated enemies while her teammates focused on room-to-room clearing. Her small size allowed her to move through the building undetected, gathering intelligence that proved crucial for mission success. "Outstanding work," Chen Lobin commented during the debrief. "You found a way to maximize your strengths while minimizing your weaknesses. That's exactly the kind of tactical thinking we're looking for." The success marked a turning point in Sarah's training. She stopped trying to compete directly with her physically superior teammates and instead focused on developing capabilities that complemented their strengths. Her role evolved into that of a precision specialist who could solve problems that conventional tactics couldn't address. As Phase 1 training continued, Sarah mastered skills she had never imagined learning. Advanced surveillance techniques, psychological warfare, improvised weapons construction, and survival in hostile environments became second nature. More importantly, she developed the mental resilience and tactical creativity that would be essential for independent operations. The final examination was a week-long scenario that combined all the skills developed during training. Candidates were deployed individually into a realistic operational environment where they had to accomplish complex objectives while avoiding detection and neutralizing threats. Failure meant elimination from the program and return to conventional military assignments. Sarah's mission required her to infiltrate a simulated terrorist compound, gather specific intelligence, and eliminate a high-value target without alerting security forces or endangering civilian hostages. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible, requiring perfect execution of multiple skills under extreme pressure. She spent the first 2 days conducting reconnaissance, using techniques learned during surveillance training to map security patterns and identify vulnerabilities. Her small size proved advantageous as she maneuvered through areas that would have been impossible for larger operatives to navigate undetected. The infiltration itself required skills that combined her marksmanship training with lessons in stealth and tactical movement. Sarah moved through the compound like a ghost, avoiding detection while gathering intelligence that would be crucial for the final phase of her mission. When the time came to eliminate the target, Sarah found herself in a position that would have challenged even experienced snipers. The shot required precision at a distance of nearly 600 meters, through a narrow window, with civilian hostages in the immediate vicinity. Missing was not an option, and neither was being detected by the compound's security forces. Sarah's shot was perfect. The target was eliminated instantly, and she extracted from the compound without being detected. Her mission was accomplished with a level of precision and professionalism that impressed even the veteran instructors who had designed the exercise. Exceptional performance, Logan announced during her final evaluation. You've demonstrated that unconventional soldiers can excel in unconventional roles when they're properly trained and properly utilized. You're ready for Phase 2. Sarah had successfully completed the first phase of the most challenging training program the military offered, but she knew this was only the beginning. Phase 2 would introduce her to the real world of special operations, where the stakes would be measured in lives rather than training scores. She was about to enter a realm where her skills would be tested against genuine threats, and where failure could have consequences that extended far beyond her own military career. As she prepared to move to the next level of training, Sarah reflected on how far she had come since those early days of basic training when other recruits had mocked her size and questioned her capabilities. She had proven that determination and skill could overcome conventional limitations, but the real test was still ahead of her. The mission she would soon be assigned would require everything she had learned and more, in situations where there would be no safety net and no second chances. Phase 2 training took place in an entirely different facility, one that existed even deeper in the shadows of military operations than the ranch. Sarah found herself at a location that official records indicated was a geological survey station, but which actually served as the final training ground for operatives who would work in the most sensitive and dangerous assignments the military could offer. The instructor who met her at this new facility was unlike anyone she had encountered before. General Patricia Morrison was a legend in special operations circles, though her achievements were classified at levels that ensured most military personnel would never learn of her existence. She had spent 30 years in various combat roles, rising through the ranks during an era when women were officially excluded from frontline positions but somehow finding ways to serve where she was needed most. "Welcome to the real world, Chen," General Morrison said as they walked through a facility that looked more like a high-tech research laboratory than a military training center. "Everything you've learned so far has been preparation. Now you begin training for actual missions that will require you to operate independently in hostile environments where failure isn't just a training score, it's a death sentence." The general's reputation was built on a career that had taken her from conventional military units to the most classified corners of special operations. She had been one of the first women to serve in combat roles during conflicts that were never officially acknowledged, and her expertise in unconventional warfare was recognized at the highest levels of government. "I've been following your progress through Phase 1, Morrison continued. "Your instructors tell me you've developed into exactly the kind of operative we need for missions that conventional special forces can't handle. Small, precise, and intelligent enough to adapt when situations go wrong." Sarah felt both honored and intimidated by the general's attention. She had heard whispered stories about Morrison's legendary missions, operations that had prevented international incidents and eliminated threats that the public would never know existed. "What kind of missions are we talking about, ma'am?" "The kind that happen in places we're not officially supposed to be, against targets we're not officially supposed to know about." Situations where deniability is as important as success, and where you'll be operating without backup or extraction plans. Phase 2 training introduced Sarah to skills that existed at the intersection of military operations and intelligence work. She learned to assume false identities, to blend into civilian populations, and to operate sophisticated surveillance equipment that could gather intelligence from seemingly innocent locations. Advanced weapons training went far beyond marksmanship to include improvised explosives, chemical agents, and psychological warfare techniques. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for the precise, technical aspects of demolition work, where her scientific mind and steady hands proved invaluable. Explosives are like surgery, explained Master Sergeant Rodriguez, her demolitions instructor. Too little and you fail to accomplish the objective. Too much and you create collateral damage that compromises the mission. Precision is everything. The psychological training during Phase 2 was designed to prepare operatives for situations where they would be completely isolated from support systems, operating in hostile environments where capture could mean torture or death. Sarah learned techniques for resisting interrogation, maintaining cover identities under extreme stress, and making life-or-death decisions without guidance from superiors. "You're being trained to think like a general while operating like a ghost," Dr. Winters explained during one of their sessions. Strategic thinking combined with tactical execution, all while maintaining psychological resilience under conditions that would break most people. 3 months into Phase 2, Sarah received her first real mission assignment. She was to infiltrate a suspected terrorist network operating in Eastern Europe, gather intelligence on their weapons procurement activities, and, if possible, disrupt their operations without revealing American involvement. The mission briefing took place in a secure room where General Morrison outlined objectives that seemed impossibly complex for a single operative. Sarah would be operating under a carefully constructed cover identity as a freelance journalist, with backup documentation that would withstand routine scrutiny but would not survive detailed investigation. "Your primary objective is intelligence gathering," Morrison explained, pointing to locations on a detailed map of the target region. "But, if you encounter opportunities to disrupt their operations without compromising your cover, you're authorized to take action." This is exactly the kind of mission the program was designed for: too sensitive for conventional forces, too complex for traditional intelligence operations. Sarah spent 2 weeks in final preparation, memorizing her cover story and practicing the skills she would need to maintain her journalist identity while conducting covert operations. She studied the target region's history, culture, and political situation until she could discuss local issues with the expertise expected of a professional correspondent. The insertion was accomplished through commercial airlines and tourist visas, with Sarah traveling under her assumed identity through several European countries before arriving in the target area. Her equipment was smuggled separately through diplomatic channels, hidden in locations she would access after establishing her operational base. The terrorist network she was targeting proved to be more sophisticated and dangerous than intelligence reports had suggested. Led by a former military officer named Viktor Kozlov, the group had connections throughout the regional criminal underworld and access to military-grade weapons that suggested government sponsorship from hostile nations. Sarah established her cover by conducting actual journalist interviews with local officials and business leaders, filing genuine news stories with a media outlet that was actually a front for intelligence operations. Her work provided legitimate reasons for her presence in the area while giving her access to information networks that proved invaluable for her real mission. The breakthrough came during her 3rd week of operations when she identified a warehouse complex that appeared to be the center of the network's weapons storage and distribution activities. Using surveillance equipment hidden in her camera gear, she documented the movement of personnel and materials that confirmed the site's importance. But, as Sarah prepared to gather more detailed intelligence, she discovered that the terrorist network had become aware of increased attention from unknown sources. Security around their operations had been significantly enhanced, and several key personnel had disappeared, suggesting they suspected infiltration by government agents. The situation became critical when Sarah learned that the network was planning to accelerate their timeline for a major operation. Intelligence suggested they were preparing to attack civilian targets in Western Europe using chemical weapons acquired through their criminal connections. The attack was scheduled to occur within days, making immediate action essential. Sarah found herself in exactly the kind of situation her training had been designed for: a rapidly evolving crisis that required independent decision-making and immediate action without guidance from superiors. Contact with her handlers would compromise her position, but inaction would result in civilian casualties that could number in the hundreds. Using skills learned during her demolitions training, Sarah developed a plan to destroy the weapon's cache while making the destruction appear to be the result of an accident or internal conflict within the criminal organization. The operation would require her to penetrate the heavily guarded warehouse complex and place explosives in locations that would ensure complete destruction of the chemical weapons. The infiltration took place during a thunderstorm that provided cover for her approach to the warehouse complex. Sarah's small size allowed her to navigate through security gaps that would have been impossible for larger operatives, and her advanced training and stealth movement kept her undetected despite the presence of numerous guards. Inside the warehouse, Sarah discovered that the situation was even worse than intelligence reports had indicated. The terrorists had acquired enough chemical weapons to attack multiple targets simultaneously, and the sophistication of their equipment suggested involvement by a state sponsor with advanced military capabilities. Sarah placed her charges with the precision of a surgeon, calculating blast patterns and timing sequences that would ensure complete destruction of the weapons while creating the appearance of an accidental explosion. The technical complexity of the operation required every skill she had learned during her intensive training. The extraction phase proved to be the most dangerous part of the mission. Security forces had detected some anomaly in their perimeter, though they hadn't identified the specific threat. Sarah found herself moving through the warehouse complex while guards conducted increasingly thorough searches for intruders. It was during this critical phase that Sarah encountered Viktor Kozlov himself, the terrorist leader whose network she had been infiltrating. The meeting was completely unexpected, placing both of them in a situation where split-second decisions would determine survival. Kozlov was investigating the warehouse personally, concerned about security breaches that his subordinates had reported but couldn't explain. He was armed and accompanied by 2 bodyguards, creating a tactical situation that conventional training hadn't specifically addressed. Sarah found herself face-to-face with a target whose elimination would significantly disrupt the terrorist network but whose death at this location would compromise her carefully planned explosive operation. She had perhaps 30 seconds to decide between accomplishing her primary mission and taking advantage of an unexpected opportunity. The decision she made reflected months of training in tactical thinking and psychological resilience. Rather than attempting to eliminate Kozlov immediately, Sarah allowed him to discover evidence that suggested the warehouse had been compromised by a rival criminal organization. Her cover story was sophisticated enough to redirect his suspicions away from government infiltration. Kozlov's reaction was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Believing he was under attack from criminal rivals, he ordered his men to evacuate the facility immediately and prepare for retaliation against the wrong targets. The evacuation cleared the warehouse just as Sarah's explosives detonated, destroying the chemical weapons and eliminating the terrorist threat. The explosion was massive enough to be seen from several miles away, and the destruction was complete enough to ensure that no trace of the chemical weapons survived. Local authorities attributed the incident to an industrial accident, while the terrorist network blamed rival criminals for the attack on their operations. Sarah's extraction was accomplished through predetermined routes that took her out of the country using the same journalist cover that had gotten her in. Her mission had been accomplished with a level of success that exceeded all expectations, but the experience had given her a sobering understanding of the realities of independent operations. When she returned for debriefing, General Morrison's assessment was unequivocal. Outstanding performance under extremely challenging conditions. You demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and operational flexibility that this program is designed to develop. But Morrison also recognized that Sarah's success had come at a psychological cost. Operating completely alone in hostile territory, making life or death decisions without support or guidance, had pushed her to the limits of human endurance. The stress of maintaining cover while conducting dangerous operations had left marks that weren't immediately visible. "How are you handling the psychological aftermath?" Morrison asked during their private debrief. "I'm discovering that success in these missions doesn't necessarily feel like victory," Sarah replied honestly. "I accomplished the objectives, but the isolation and stress of operating alone are harder to deal with than I expected. That's a normal response to abnormal situations. The kind of work you've proven you can do requires psychological resilience that most people don't possess. But it also exacts a price that we need to acknowledge and manage." Morrison went on to explain that operatives who excelled in independent operations often struggled with the transition back to normal military or civilian life. The skills that made them effective in hostile environments could become liabilities in conventional social situations. "You have a choice to make," Morrison continued. "You've proven that you have exceptional capabilities for this type of work. We have additional missions that require your specific skill set, operations that could have significant impact on national security. But, continuing in this role means accepting psychological and personal costs that will only increase over time. Sarah spent several days considering Morrison's words and reflecting on her experiences during the mission. She had accomplished something significant, prevented an attack that would have killed innocent people, and proven that her capabilities extended far beyond what anyone had originally imagined. But she had also discovered that success in this arena required sacrifices that went beyond physical risk. Her decision came after a conversation with her brother, who had returned from his own military service with physical and psychological wounds that were still healing years later. He understood better than most the costs of serving in roles that pushed the boundaries of human capability. The question: